It's Adil Fazal here, market analyst at CFDs.com, your specialist in spread betting and CFD brokerage. Be sure to visit the website. Alternatively, you can visit the actual educational site too, which is www.cfds.education. Okay, let's get started in terms of deciphering today's market movements and analysis, etc. Let's try and break this down. Okay. In terms of the European markets themselves, Euro stocks, you can see here, certainly closed, or certainly under pressure to a large part. Okay, the FTSE 100 itself also more or less flat on the day. In terms of the French CAC, if I just and the DAX as well, the DAX itself more or less flat, 0.3%, nothing substantial from that perspective. So certainly the French CAC also finished negative. So we have terrorism concerns, and that certainly is the overriding factor, I think, in Europe. Now, we did have Mr. Draghi on board, but unfortunately Mr. Draghi failed to provide the short squeeze catalyst. We did have the euro spike early in the morning, and we were under pressure to a large extent until Mr. Draghi obviously entered the foray and he talked down the euro, i.e. promising more QE down the road. Now, that obviously has been overshadowed given the fact that the markets, if you look at the actual German DAX, you can see that the markets certainly have factored that in already to a large part. The daily chart you can see here on the German DAX, you have a doji candle, and you can see that they're thrust higher from the pivot low of 9400, and obviously we are now into the 11100 region. We are dying to close this gap above. Now, at the moment, the market certainly has failed to do so. Now, given the fact that we have terrorism concerns, etc., etc., the market certainly is in a risk-off mode. Now, we had the barley situation today, okay, and certainly it has come to an end given the hostage situation there as well. Okay, so in terms of the market bias itself and the economic data today, if we go over the actual results in terms of just today's performance thus far, you had, from the UK, you had public finance, nothing major. You had Mr. Courier and Mr. Draghi speaking. Yes, they sang the same type of dovish tone, but the markets certainly have already taken that in stride, except the currency market. The currency market was resolute and certainly sent the actual euro low, but I think that was more to do with the hawkish rhetoric overnight from the US and the Fed members rather than Mr. Draghi itself. So also we did have negative inflation as well from Germany, so that was certainly hurting the euro. And then we also had some economic data in terms of European sentiment, if I'm correct, Eurozone consumer confidence, that came out negative. So again, that certainly hindered the actual euro's ability to move higher. Okay, in terms of the US, just going over the actual US data today at present. Let's just go over this today for you again, give you a recap. Kansas Fed came in slightly weaker than expected, and Mr. Dudley was obviously hawkish as usual. So it's whether it's one and done or one and no more, etc. It's debatable, okay? It certainly is debatable. In terms of the US markets themselves, let's bring up the chart of the US. The Nasdaq itself on the weekly chart is back at that double top resistance zone, and now is certainly challenging that red candle, okay, on the weekly chart. Yes, or last week's candle certainly has neutralized a lot of the loss thus far. And the 10-minute chart itself, it has been putting in double top and triple top resistance. Okay, so we are seeing weakness finally on the Nasdaq, and we have an unfilled gap below that needs to close. Given the terrorism concerns, etc., that should dominate price action going into the close. Okay, which is in the next 15 minutes. Okay, so in terms of the Nasdaq and the S&P 500 as well, let's see what the S&P 500 is. The daily chart, you can see there we're putting in a topping tail at the fib 75%. So certainly is indicating resistance. 60-minute chart, a failed potential bull flag. We more or less approached the gap fill level, and obviously we started to reverse lower. We have an unfilled gap below at the 2081 level, so certainly all eyes on that into the close. So interesting scenario, folks. Okay, interesting in terms of the Nasdaq and the S&P 500 certainly coming into resistance. Okay, and showing a weakness as well. Okay, so let me just update this. Okay, so the actual US markets certainly are exhausting. The Asian markets overnight more or less flat as well, if I can recollect. You had the Nikkei, or basically flat, up 20 points. You had the Shanghai more or less flat, up 13 points. So no real movements there, okay? And again, like I said, going into a long weekend, it's all about terrorism, etc., etc. we are looking at further weakness going into the weekend from my perspective. Okay, so the European market certainly did wilt towards a close, okay, even though we had Mr. Draghi, and that generally is a bearish sign when you have an individual that was classed as a Draghi put, okay, or the central bank put, and forces the shorts to squeeze higher. If that fails to propel the markets higher, then that generally is considered weak or bearish in terms of price action, along with the Euro USD touching the 1.0650 handle. Okay, now in terms of the Euro touching the 1.0650 handle, we all know on a weekly basis and a daily basis, it certainly is major support on the Euro USD itself. If you go to your 60-minute chart, you know that level is obviously coming into support, given the fact that the whole move itself was based on the weaker German inflation data rather than anything else. Okay, and also obviously given the fact that we had the hawkish rhetoric from the Fed members, that certainly sent the euro rather than the QE trade. Okay, so as such, so that certainly needs to be taken into consideration as well, and therefore I am expecting bearish price action going into the close. It's been an interesting week. I mean, it's been very hard, but I managed to think of 184 points for the week. I have 2 more short positions. I've shorted the CAC again. I already remained short the Nasdaq, and therefore I am looking for further weakness going into the close. Okay, so Euro USD coming back into support, and therefore that's obviously bearish for European equities, and it's very unlikely given the fact that even Mr. Draghi's speech, etc., failed to really ignite the market higher. So again, terrorism certainly remains a dominant theme, and therefore you are looking at geopolitical concerns indicating risk off. Now, let's start by looking at each index. I'll bring up the German DAX first of all. You can see the German DAX in a 10-minute and the 60-minute chart that you've put in a potential double top scenario now. We've put in a bearish engulfing candle at the 1500 hours, and you are looking at consolidation, a bearish consolidation, a bear flag formation, and down we go. We have an unfilled gap on the German DAX at 10,960. Given terrorism concerns, given the fact that Draghi's out of the way and that failed to propel the market higher to a large extent, given the fact that we had weaker inflation, that generally indicates a lagging economy, and obviously given the fact that Draghi acknowledges that growth certainly is lackluster, Volkswagen concerns still remain, terrorism concerns still remain, so therefore you are looking at a risk-off scenario and looking at weakness going into the Monday's session, especially given the fact that the Euro USD is back now into support, and therefore that's weak and considered bearish. Okay, now we have the French CAC. If I bring up the French CAC on the daily chart, you can see that you have a bearish candle on the daily as well, so therefore indicating weakness. Okay, you have an unfilled gap below. We actually put in a lower high on the French CAC, so again, bear that in mind. You've actually put in a lower high on the French CAC on the 60-minute chart, so that certainly is indicating bearish price action going forward. Hence the reason why I'm short the French CAC. Looking at a potential H&S formation here. Okay, so we've bounced off the neckline, and given the fact that you have an unfilled gap below at 4,800, that certainly does indicate that we are looking to close that. Now, if you take the pivot high at 4,900, I'll just draw this in right now actually before. So if we take the pivot high at 4,900, and we take the actual, sorry, not 4,900, 49. Just confirm this is 4,962, the pivot top. So 4,962 minus, take the pivot low, which is currently 4,880. Okay, so if we take 4,880, so let's just round it off to 4,960 to 4,880, and if we project it based on that, you're looking at an 80-point move. You're looking at 4,800, which bingo is your gap fill level. So this is mathematically perfect. Okay, so therefore we are looking at further weakness on the French CAC going into Monday's session. That's my interpretation of events thus far. Okay, on the French CAC itself. Okay, and that certainly is indicating weakness. Going to a 10-minute chart, the French CAC, you can see that we certainly put in a pivot low at 49.05. That's when I actually initially covered my short position. And looking at the actual chart itself in greater detail, you can see that we have a H&S on the micro level as well. So if you look at the rising contracting wedge breakout, you are looking at obviously weakness. You have the left shoulder here, you've got the head, and then obviously this bear flag formation here, and looking for potentially lower prices. Take the pivot high at 4,935 to the neckline at 4,911, looking at 25.4, which obviously takes you down to 4,890, which obviously is your gap fill level, and that certainly is the actual bearish scenario. So again, risk off from my perspective, certainly risk off. Okay. Understand. Okay, interesting. So risk off, looking at further weakness on the French indices. So therefore looking at 4,890 first of all, If that were to crack 4,880, and then obviously you are looking at lower prices based on the 60-minute chart at 4,800. So again, get ready for downside. That's my interpretation thus far. The Euro stocks, so let's bring up the chart. The Euro stocks daily chart, 2 dojis in a row. And given the fact that Euro USD is at double bottom now, it's no sort of surprise, folks. Okay, no surprise at all from my perspective. If that Euro were to hold at 1.0650, 1.0630 level, then you are looking at European equities cracking and moving higher. Okay. Now, Mr. Draghi didn't commit to anything. All he said was that he was going to obviously analyze the situation in December, etc., and see what the status quo was. Now, from my perspective, given the fact that European equities have basically negated everything in terms of the Volkswagen scandal, in terms of the terrorism concerns, and obviously are back at the highs, it's very hard for him to justify more QE. That's my understanding. If the markets start to fall and start to crash quite substantially and go back and test on the French CAC down here at 3,200, etc., then, or even potentially lower, then he has the basically ammunition, and then he has the argument for more QE. So markets have to punish Mr. Draghi's philosophy in order for his philosophy to obviously re-emerge, i.e. more QE. So that certainly is going to be interesting as well going forward. But again, remember, geopolitics and socioeconomics always dominate QE argument, always dominate and always surpass and exceed the QE argument. So bear that in mind. You can have as much QE as you want, but if you have fear in the market and uncertainty, no QE can work. Okay, so bear that in mind as well. Okay, although in the last week or two, especially this week, that argument or that philosophy or that tenet, that certainly has been nullified to a large extent. But having said that, in the long run, that is the case. Okay, and that's what I was taught in economics as well, so I have to adhere to it. Okay, so that certainly is the Bible according to, or the Bible of economics anyway. Okay, so a doji candle on a daily chart indicating exhaustion, indicating potential reversal. 60-minute chart, you can see that we've obviously held that double top, triple top, failed to penetrate. Buyers have not come in. We've closed this gap as well, so therefore indicating more bearish price action. And you can clearly see here that you also have the H&S formation on the Euro stocks as well. Okay, so interesting scenario here. Very similar type of theme, and confirmation of weakness on the CAC, and obviously German DAX is indicating it too. You've got lower high here. Okay, and you are looking at a right shoulder. From a trading perspective, if I take the pivot high, and I'll be able to draw the same type of pattern here as well, which is very interesting. So bear with me whilst I just do this. Okay, so basically we're looking at further weakness, further downside given the lower high. We've closed that gap now, and you are looking at a potential downside target. Let's have a look. H&S equals the pivot high, which is at 3475, and you take it down to 3425, so minus 3425, and you're looking at a 50-point drop. So therefore you're looking at 3375. Okay, if I'm correct. Okay, so yep, hopefully my mathematical skills are still valid. Okay, so yes, you're looking at 3360, which is gap fill. So more or less there. Okay, so again, mathematically perfect as well to close that gap. Interesting. Okay, interesting. So the more analysis we do, the more of an indication we are getting that this market is going lower. Okay, there is the options X argument, obviously, and given the low volume, etc., Thanksgiving, so on and so forth, but I think that's irrelevant. I mean, you have the Christmas rally argument as well. From my perspective, I'm a day trader. I'm not going to focus too much on seasonal trends. Okay, I'm looking at what the market wants to do at present. I don't want to project anything that's happened in the past. We're living in the present, not the past, and nor are we living in the future. So all we can do is react to what we can see at present, trade what you see, not what you think, and that's basically what I'm trying to do. You have terrorism concerns, you have hawkish Fed, obviously concerns there. You have China obviously into resistance. I mean, I've not even brought in the argument of the Shanghai. I mean, you look at the Shanghai, we've been stalling ever since at the fib 75%. So if the Shanghai is into resistance, where do you think the rest of the markets are going to go? Down. Okay. Not only that, you have the Nikkei, and bring the Nikkei argument into the equation. The Nikkei has closed its gap and certainly has indicated resistance. Yesterday's doji held as resistance, and you are looking at a further move down. So everything is pointing down from my perspective. The Nikkei is into weakness, the Shanghai is into weakness. There's no more Asian market rally, it's coming to an end. US markets, I've already shown you, are certainly exhausted and looking at potential resistance. Look at the S&P 500, look at the daily chart, and you can see there's a topping tail there being formed. Okay, you obviously rejected the fib 75%. down we go. Okay, looking at your 60-minute chart as well, you have this bull flag formation. We've closed the gap above. No real, I mean, we've retraced more than 50% of this green candle now. You have terrorism concerns, etc., etc. You're holding previous resistance equal support. Is that going to break lower? Yes, I do expect so. Okay, given the fact that you have fear and so on and so forth, so uncertainty, etc., etc. As soon as a bull flag is negated, you generally look at a move in the opposite direction, and therefore you get a risk-off scenario. Okay, so that's basically what I'm expecting, and what I do expect going forward. Okay, so that's basically the situation that we're dealing with at present. Okay. Right, in terms of European indices, we're looking at the FTSE 100 now. Let's bring up the FTSE itself. Weekly chart of the FTSE 100, you know that it's an inside bar, 200 MA, downward sloping diagonal trend line. Obviously, the larger scheme of things, you have this H&S formation. So if you're a long-term trader, you are looking at further weakness. This is just a minor little pullback, and then you are looking at the downtrend continuing, okay? Given the fact that copper is currently, as I speak, making a new low, and that isn't exactly bullish for the FTSE 100 going forward. Given the fact that you have a hawkish Fed going to raise rates, again, that's not exactly good for commodities. So long term, if you're a long-term trader, this FTSE now is into solid resistance, and you will be expecting weakness going forward. The FTSE 100 has held previous resistance, or previous support equals resistance at the fib 75%, along with the S&P 500, along with the Shanghai index, and the Nikkei is into gap fill. Common sense tells you which direction are we going. Yes, we're going lower. Okay, so 60-minute chart of the FTSE, double top potentially put in here, failed to move higher, negated, etc., etc. You are looking for further weakness. 10-minute chart of the FTSE 100. Again, we did have this diagonal trend line. It certainly disrespected it today. That was mainly because of the bid rumours from the British American Tobacco, if I'm correct, BAT. Okay, so again, you are looking at weakness given the fact that we haven't put in a higher high, we put in a double top, and you are looking at further weakness. Currently the market's already trading at the 6,300. Futures are certainly selling off. The 200 MA is at 6,300. Horizontal supports at 6,312. Both of them more than likely will go, given the fact that copper has made a new low. Oil did try to rally, took to 41.3, was rejected very quickly, and was sent lower, spiraling lower. Okay, so that certainly seems a scenario. For my concerns will be geopolitical fear going into the weekend. Obviously, God, I pray for everybody in Europe. I hope everybody remains safe this weekend, and I would encourage everybody just to take care of themselves, and let's just pray for peace, love, tranquility, unity, and respect for one another, and tolerance. This ISIS is a sickness. Like my spiritual master said, it's a mushroom, a poisonous mushroom that must be eradicated. Okay, and the West needs to stop supporting dictators, and the West needs to stop bombing innocent civilians, and the West needs to start changing its stance as well to a large extent, because what they're doing is they're actually fermenting and creating these fanatics. So it's a really tricky situation that we're in right now, especially with regards to Syrian refugees. And then obviously you have the idiot like Mr. Donald Trump, who wants to make ID cards, and God knows what he wants to do. I mean, we're living in crazy times, folks. Okay, living in crazy times. Focus on yourself. Make sure you have good character. Respect all, love all, and pray for peace. Okay, let's pray for peace. Hopefully one day we shall see peace in the Middle East. Okay, and again, this is a culmination. Be sure to visit cfds.com for your trading needs. Goodbye now.